Good morning and welcome to the AutoTalk weekly wrap. Sorry for the slight delay there, a few technical difficulties. You'll notice my camera is in a different position today, but hopefully that will all be fine. Sorry too if I sound a bit funny. I have, like every parent with a child in daycare at the moment, the lurg again. So hopefully that clears up because I'm off to AADA next week and we are going to buy some dealers some drinks. So if you are going to AADA in Sydney on Tuesday the 13th, yes, we are holding drinks in town. It's we've emailed the details a couple of times now, but if you want to come along to those, I think there's about 25, 26 members of the industry, of the Kiwi industry already coming, then email Deborah at automediagroup.co.nz and she'll send the details for that. Joining me as usual is my group of middle-aged moaners, as I'm starting to call us, Graham McDonald and David Crawford.
Boy, what introduction that is, Richard. Well done. Clap, clap.
Now is you were literally moaning a second ago, Graham, that someone was valve bouncing a Corolla in the car park outside. Is that still happening?
It is. It's actually out on the street. I'm not quite sure what the stated purpose is, but I think they're trying to figure out the stated working limits of a rev counter, and they're doing a really good job of it too. So apologies if the sound is crap from the Croydon Empire here in West Auckland, but West Aucklanders are doing West Auckland things.
And David, how is semi-retirement still treating you?
It's treating me well. Yes, I'm starting to relax and starting to get a little bit of extra time on my hands. It's all good.
At which point will you be joining us from a picnic table outside a caravan at a sunny beachside camping spot?
Oh, that could be any time after mid-July.
Excellent. Well, look, let's get into the news fairly quickly today because there are some doozies to go around the place. Let's start with a story which, while you may have seen it elsewhere now, was broken by AutoTalk. I've been working on this one for a little bit. And that is that LDV and SsangYong distribution has been sold to Inchcape, the UK-listed kind of global vehicle retail and distribution group. The operations of Great Lake Motor Distributors, the company that distributes LDV and SsangYong vehicles in New Zealand, has been sold offshore. Currently locally owned by father and son team Rick and Dion Cooper, UK-listed vehicle distributor and retailer Inchcape will take over the business. The purchase was confirmed in a statement to AutoTalk from Inchcape, though details remain thin on the ground. It looks like they've bought those operations. LDV and SsangYong, obviously, small, but I would argue relatively appealing brands at the moment because they've got fairly strong electrification curves, and particularly with LDV. And of course, they'll be pairing up with Subaru of New Zealand, which doesn't necessarily have the best CO2 record at this point. Would that be fair to say, David? They've struggled a little?
They have. Typical for a brand of vehicles that has a true sporting heritage to a lot of their design and motors. But like most brands, they do have a pathway mapped out for electrification. This purchase, though, is likely to help speed up that process, and it'll be interesting to see what shape it takes in New Zealand, and whether there will be a holding company and they'll have different distributors for the brands, or whether they'll merge them all under one company. So they have set up an additional.
They've set up an additional company, or they did on May 3. So they've set up a company named it's Inchcape Distributors, or so. I can't remember exactly what the term is, but that's there. Of course, Subaru New Zealand is called Subaru of New Zealand, but I think that's quite a long-held thing.
Yeah, so Inchcape is the owner, but in New Zealand, Subaru is Subaru of New Zealand under Inchcape. So I'd imagine that they'll get some arrangement in place around that. Of course, that will then facilitate the sharing and distribution of CO2 credits in a much easier way for them. It'll just broaden out the prospective range of vehicles that they can offer.
Mm-hmm. My understanding is that the distribution operations are basically moving into the fairly substantially sized Lady Ruby Drive, East Tamaki location currently used by Subaru of New Zealand, so that'll be good for them. No word yet on whether they have purchased the dealership operations of Great Lake Motor Distributors, so that's going to be interesting. I'm not sure if this is going to be the last we'll hear of Rick and Dion Cooper. They are wily operators, would that be a fair statement? They've been an interesting. They were an interesting addition to the distribution landscape in New Zealand.
But of course, they have a long heritage as being involved at the dealership level.
Yes.
The Sanyong and LDV gave them an opportunity to move up into the ranks of being a bona fide distributor. And I think the first couple of years were quite steep learning curves for them. That was about the time that I started at the MIA, and I had paid a number of visits to them to help them settle in. And they've been a really good distributor in the ranks. They've played their part. They've not held back on views when we've needed views expressed on particular policies. So they've been a good player in that respect. In some ways, it'll be sad to see them disappear. It's always good to have characters in the industry.
Yeah, they had an interesting way of doing business when they were first starting to launch this. They started off with Sanyong. They took it over, I think, with the help of a previous distributor, Russell Burling. I went down to Taupo to catch up with Rick to do a story on it, and literally the meeting was I walked onto the demolition site essentially of the building they were building into a warehouse, and Rick's standing in there leaning against a stack of jib with a box of beer, cracked one open, and we did the interview in the middle of a construction site with a box of beer. It was it was an interesting one. So yeah.
So was that really a case of corporate versus character? And so what we're really talking about to an extent is the loss of character at a distributor level and replacing once again with corporate. Now, nothing wrong with that, but I think the refreshing approach towards things was literally that there were characters as opposed to a corporate take on how to run, first of all, a dealership network, but then distributor as well.
But yeah. I might add though, in terms of Inkscape and Subaru of New Zealand, Wal is a character as well. So and he's been around for a very, very long time. I like Wal. He thinks a little bit differently to a number of the other distributors. It's always interesting getting his perspective.
Yes, and he was one of the very, very early adopters of used import vehicles into the mainstream franchise dealership networks, first of all in terms of servicing and parts, and then I think one of the very early adopters of what was effectively called parallel imports back in those days. This is prior to the Toyota program, the Mazda programs. I think Subaru, under Wally were one of the very early adopters.
Wally always talked on the basis of the growing car park. He felt he had a bit of an oversight of the used stuff coming in too, because it was all basically Subaru customers, whether they were his customers or not. The trick was to make them his customers.
That's right.
I think the interesting thing too with this is some of the people that have been through the place. I think that Great Lakes was actually a pretty good identifier of talent. And, they've got a great general manager at the moment in form of Andrew Bayliss. Andrew's been around a very long time. In fact, he's actually returning, I guess, to the fold because he many years ago worked for Subaru New Zealand. And I hope, and I've may have heard some rumours that hopefully he's hanging around at the leadership there. They have a great EV project manager in terms of Amanda. And, of course, they were, I guess, a key part of the growth of the career of the very well-known Warren Wilmot, who's currently running the BYD brand in New Zealand. He developed his persona as the van geek there and then moved into learning a lot about electric vehicles. And, of course, since then, he's gone on to do some really interesting things. Yeah. Great. Right. Now, let's move on to the next story, and one that no doubt David's going to have a few things. Well, I think you'll both have a few things to say on it, but Transport Minister Michael Wood stood down over airport shares. Michael Wood has been relieved of his transport portfolio duties for failing to correctly declare his Auckland airport shares. The decision was made by the Prime Minister, Chris Prime Minister Chris Hipkins, who made the announcement earlier today. This was, of course, reported earlier in the week.
Everyone knows the story.
Yeah, we don't even need to. We don't even need to discuss it.
Everyone knows the story.
Yeah.
And also, I think every talkback listener in New Zealand also knows the story too. This has been a bit of a hot potato.
I have to say, I am very surprised at the Boy Scout minister who, through his inaction, has right royally cocked up. And he knows he's got egg all over his face. It's inexplicable. And I feel Chris Hipkins' frustration. I'm not actually a Chippy fan, but I really do feel his frustration. This is something that should never have happened. Easy to fix. And when he put his mind to it, 24 hours later, gone. 12 times. I mean, this is just...
And it's when it becomes the 12 times you start going, well, is that incompetence or is that deliberate? I mean, it's unfortunately, it probably is just a lack of thoughtfulness, but the problem is once you get to that many times that it becomes a problem, really. And then initially when he was, it was just he didn't sell them. I assume this would be a very short turnaround for him to getting his job back. I'm not so sure anymore.
Well, the public backlash has been quite extreme. And I heard a number of people saying, John Key was bound to have shares in a company. And say, well, the difference is John Key got caught with it. And what did he do? The first thing he found out was in a blind trust. Got rid of them. Done. 12 times. And I don't buy forgetfulness. I don't buy I was busy. I don't buy I was going to get around it. I don't know, I'm not a Labour fan at the best of times, but there's a level of arrogance here that, David, you may have some cautious words to say about in your dealings with the minister or the ex-minister that have come through shining here, is that degree of arrogance about somebody who knows better than you, irrespective of the advice that has been given to you by your officials, and there's some little alarm bells ringing there, comes through in this decision. It's only $13,000 worth of shares, but it's the arrogance about somebody who believes they know better than you.
I couldn't agree more, Graham. This is shoddy. It's defies logic and does appear like I know better than you, etc. And it's not the first time for Labour ministers. This Labour government is starting to look very tired. I go on record as saying I wish and hope that I'll be able to say come October, bye-bye.
Oh, that's I guess now you're out the door. You can say those kind of things.
Well, I might have even been tempted to say it when I was in the door, getting at this stage. It's just you can't have a government doing this sort of stuff. It is reputational damage on an international stage, and it does not look good for us. It just makes us look like a banana republic.
So, do we think he'll be back?
Probably. Labour's got a talent pool right now shallower than a Sahara puddle. So what are you going to do? I mean, who else? You've got another 4 or 5 months to roll the machine on until you can actually turn it off and hopefully either refresh it or God only knows where you refresh it from. So what else do you do? There actually isn't anybody else you can put into that particular role. Which would make matters worse. They can't just park the portfolio for the next couple of months until Parliament rises. So Chippy has to do something. And I guess my gut instinct, being an ex-political operator myself, is they're going to park this for 3 or 4 weeks. It'll go away. Something else will come along. It generally does. They're like buses, political scandals. And this quietly slip him into the role will be a slap on the hand, and he'll have learned his lesson and he'll be a little bit contrite about it, and they'll just roll on a bit and hope everyone kind of forgets until election time. Because when the House rises, everyone forgets. Hurrah, we're in election mode. How wonderful are we? But I go back to the point I made about arrogance, and it's not around the decision itself. But David, you and David Vincent, I know, talked frequently about the level of arrogance that this particular ex-minister had in the portfolio in his dealings with the industry on industry-related areas. I can't think of a time when we've had less genuine consultation and genuine ability to find common ground than the current administration we've had around transport-related matters that affect us. And we've called it arrogance before. We were talking only a few weeks about the revisions to the Clean Car Discount Scheme and about the recommendations made versus the recommendations the minister made and who the minister was listening to and who he wasn't. Again, arrogance. This is just a small piece of what I think is the bigger picture.
Yeah, it's a minister who has been picking and choosing what advice he wants to listen to and obey and which advice he wants to ignore. It's a pattern.
Kira McNulty is holding the portfolio on a temporary basis. Does anyone see him as a future transport minister, or is he literally just the current Mr. Fix-It? Which, ironically, Michael Wood used to be the mix of Mr. Fix-It. Well, Chippy was too. I guess they both were mixed Mr. Fix-Its.
I don't know. I mean, and again, politics 101. So is Mr. Fix-It because you are... And I think about the previous Mr. Fix-It in the National Administration was Stephen Joyce. Remember Stephen Joyce? So he was the guy when things went badly wrong, when there was a political cock-up, someone played bad. Stephen Joyce walked in the front door, shook everything up, and made things go away or happen. So Labor's approach towards Fix-It men has, in general, post Chris Farfoy, who was the previous Mr. Fix-It, have been people that haven't fixed it through ability, but through, again, I use the word arrogance. I can't think of another word to put it. But their approach towards fixing things has been slightly different. Chris Farfoy, I think, was the last Labor minister who fixed things with genuine intent rather than going in there and just my way or the highway bashing skulls together. It's a different approach towards things. And Kieran McNulty has form.
So Kieran McNulty has managed the civil defence portfolio, I think, admirably, and has shown signs of being genuine, being well-informed, ability to make a decision. He reminds me a bit of Stephen Joyce, although Stephen Joyce was in a league of his own. And I was an official for 22 years in former lives. And I dealt with many ministers, several dozen ministers in that time. And Stephen Joyce was by far the best, by a very long shot. He was the only minister that would tell us as officials, I know why you've given us that advice. If I was in your shoes, I'd give you that same advice. But for political reasons, I'm going to do this instead. All other ministers would try and get officials to make recommendations to suit their political needs, whereas Minister Joyce made the decision quite honestly and openly about, that's good official advice, but for political reasons we're doing this. So he was prepared to nail his colours to the mast. That's a rarity. I haven't seen that in this Labor government, but McNulty's the only one I think has come close in terms of making some honest decisions. He's still young in his career, but I think he's quite pragmatic. Will Michael Wood get the portfolio back? I think almost undoubtedly he has been... he's shown all the right contriteness, and he's owned the problem. The problem is he's only owned it after 12 reminders. That's the bit that really worries me.
Only because he got caught.
The interesting about it is, going back to Stephen Joyce. Stephen Joyce, of course, kicked off the planning and building of the motorway up to Warkworth, which is set to open in the next week or so. And Michael Wood, if he doesn't get back in the chair soon, he will not get to cut the ribbon on that. And we know how much a politician in election year loves a good ribbon cutting. So,
especially on things they didn't do.
Yes. Well, Stephen Joyce was very quick. I think it was his second or third meeting with officials after he became Minister of Transport, when he said, we're going to have roads of national significance. And up until that stage, all the decision-making on roads had been projects, and a project might be a roundabout on this road, or it might be this section of road. There was never this idea of a route. So he said, we'll have national roads of significance, and he named a few, and Warkworth was among them, and Levin to Wellington Airport was among them. And that's how we got Transmission Gully. That's how we've got a number of our roads, and they are all big strategic links that are really, really kind of important.
And I believe we still haven't had a fatality on one of the Ron's roads.
No, we haven't. I think you're right on that one.
Yeah.
And a whole shit ton less on the ones that they replaced.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, let's move on to, in a very rare move, a story that is not on AutoTalk, and it's on AutoTalk for a reason I'll explain in a minute. And that is this story that was run and it's in the paywall, so I won't show too much. On the Herald, late last night, the government's clean car policy has helped Tesla revenues skyrocket nearly $500 million from a relatively paltry $66 million in 2020, the year before the policy was introduced. Tesla New Zealand's financial statements for the 2022 calendar year showed revenue of $499.5 million, double the $230.7 million posted in 2020. The rebate began in July 1 that year. The skyrocketing income is largely thanks to the clean car discount. Blah, 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 blah. And I'm not going to show you any more of that story because it's the most idiotic piece of journalism I've seen in a very long time, and I very rarely criticise other journalists. I was interviewed by News Talk ZB last night about this story, and they were quite appreciative of my take on it. Yes, Tesla has benefited from the clean car discount, but to say that, to imply multiple times that their entire success over the last 3 years in New Zealand is due to the clean car discount is just absolute misreading and misinterpretation of business. You know, I mean, if you go back to 2020, it was a niche brand with 2 high luxury models that I think started at about $170,000, and they couldn't really get supply of them anyway. Q 2021, 2022, and they basically launched 2 of the most popular cars in New Zealand that I would suggest would still be 2 of the more popular cars in New Zealand without the clean car discount. I'm not saying it didn't help. And evidence of that is the fact that the Tesla Model 3 and the Tesla Model Y are both fairly high in the top 10 of vehicles sold in Australia this year, despite the fact that they have minimal subsidies over in Australia. So,
which is an interesting point, Richard, because we have talked on this show numerous times about whether the clean car discount scheme was actually really necessary, given that it came in at the very time that global manufacturers of EV or low-emission vehicles finally had product on the table to offer the public. And the clean car discount scheme was really just almost a happy coincidence of timing. If we didn't have it, people would have bought Tesla Model 3s anyway. Tesla Model Ys, we know, are selling like hotcakes. BYD entered the market, not because BYD saw New Zealand had a clean car discount, but because BYD finally had a model fit for the public.
Oh, it certainly helped. Don't get me wrong, it certainly helped. It helped substantially. But for someone to run around and basically pull out the story again of Tesla bad, Tesla taking poor people's money and making millions in profit off it, and not paying any tax in New Zealand, which actually isn't entirely true. In the previous financial year, Tesla paid nearly $1 million of tax in New Zealand off a significantly lower turnover.
So let me put a new car perspective on this.
Yeah.
First of all, I'll comment on Tesla. I haven't yet done the query within our status database, but I'm going to have a look to see how many of those vehicles that Tesla have sold in the last 2 years are long range models, because their long range models exceed the 80k limit cutoff. And if there's a reasonable number, that would back what you guys are saying, is that they're just it's availability and they're buying them. So for a certain extent, for a company like Tesla, what we've seen is that the Chinese factory has come on board and it started, so their production capability has gone up. They introduced some more affordable models and models that consumers really wanted in terms of Model Y and Model 3. But nevertheless, what the clean car discount has done for the new vehicle sector, which is quite different from used importers, is that it's helped the new car sector in New Zealand get allocation of models that we would not have otherwise got on volume. So the clean car discount has been quite critical in getting allocation of models in volume. That's the bit that don't underestimate. What the clean car discount has also done is it's played a psychology game with people in New Zealand. And way back in a former life, when I started out my career, I was lecturing at Massey University, and one of the areas that I had a particular interest in was the use of economic instruments for environmental management. And this is where we use pricing, where there is a signal at a point of purchase. And the clean car discount for new vehicles was at a level where people felt like they were getting a bargain. Here's the irony of it. If you have a look at just the MG model, where they've got an ICE model and then the full BEV models twice the price of the ICE model, but people are buying the BEV because they feel like they're getting a discount, even though they're paying more for the equivalent ICE. So it's a whole psychological game, and so for the new car sector, don't underestimate the power of the clean car discount to have influenced allocation and to have bumped sales. Now, is it to the point that it's doubled the sales? I don't know, but it certainly has increased it. The one company that's a little bit different for, though, is Tesla, because they're only BEVs, and they had there's a psychology with Teslas in terms of their perception, and people want to buy them. They are a brand that are distinctly different in terms of its market profile and what people think. The discounts helped, but they were always going to be selling more.
The cheap Model 3s arrived, the lower price Model 3s arrived slightly before the discount. And they were still doing some serious volume in those early months of 2021 prior to the discount. They then literally paused briefly to wait for the discount when that was confirmed. They lowered their deliveries very rapidly. And then if we're talking about allocation, my understanding was that about just after the clean car discount, they managed to land a shipment that had originally been allocated for Australia into New Zealand because of the availability of the discount. So yeah, they've worked the discount, but they would have, sure, it would have not have gotten where it has, but it sure as heck isn't entirely responsible for their success in New Zealand. And I think that's misreading, and I think it's also this ongoing, it goes back to the good old tall popper, Tesla, it's luxury brand, you must be doing well if you can have that, blah, 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 must be bad. And that kind of sucks. Because my understanding at the moment, I think, is like a hybrid, a high-spec RAV4 hybrid is worth more than a Tesla Model 3. And yet you'd have no journalist going and bashing someone for buying a Toyota RAV4.
It's actually a good point, Richard. I hadn't sort of thought about it that way, but you're right, is that we in New Zealand are always the first that seems to bag anyone doing particularly well. And that's part of the whole argument that I think we've talked about. National Enact, for example, and their take on the clean car discount, the ute tax, hard-working Kiwis buying utes versus, Remuera tractor drivers dropping a little Jimmy at kindergarten in his new Tesla he bought with the discount. Well, there is a point that says, so what? It's your money. And from Tesla's perspective, if you can do well, if you can make a pile of money out of making cars people want, well, you wouldn't be the first manufacturer of motor vehicles in the world that did quite well out of that either.
Yep. And if people are bashing, Tesla's being luxury, well, I assure you the average Ranger transacting is worth more than the average Tesla transacting in New Zealand at the moment.
It probably is actually, with the Raptors going out the door, yeah.
Yeah.
That would be. I'm not sure. Last time I looked at this, the average ute price was in that 60 to 65 by volume.
Yeah, and Ranger would be at the higher end of that.
But Ranger
and a Model 3 at the moment, I think, is about 60, mid to high 60s.
Yeah.
Anywho,
good journalism at work from the Herald.
Yeah. Now, while we're talking about that, we can touch on something we got very wrong last week, and that was the police's new electric vehicle. And they've gone with the BMW i4, which I don't think is a bad choice. If anyone wants to jump over to my electric vehicle YouTube channel, EVs and Beyond, I've done a cool video on there discussing the decision there. Again, there were people online bitching about the police driving BMWs. Well, I suspect those BMWs were, once the fleet deal was done, not far off what a Hyundai would have been. And BMW are actually not bad as regards to police fleet. They do a lot of it around the world. And they've clearly said it's not necessarily the car they will choose in the long run. It's the car they're trialling because it was available. It was the one that they could actually get units on the ground and get set up in time to do the trial. So, yeah. Were you surprised at the BMW, David?
I was. I hadn't picked that particular vehicle, but it's a good one to try. It is an evaluation, and I think the idea is this is more about the reliability of the vehicle, the charging capability, how fast the charging. So it's just getting familiar with a vehicle that's big enough to do the police duties that they need, and is fast enough to do what they want it to do. and it's how do they then maintain its charging capability? It's just getting used to a full battery electric vehicle for police duties. But I was surprised, but good on BMW for getting the deal done and across the line.
Yeah. They are known to be pretty aggressive when it comes to BMW fleet stuff, as we've to government fleet stuff before in New Zealand, as we saw with the corporate vehicles the government UAP vehicles that they landed. And again, a lot of controversy about that at the time, but realistically, they were probably the best, most cost-effective operating vehicle that in that segment.
Well, if you go for what we call a whole life cycle costing, where instead of just looking at your cash price in and cash price out, this is a lease vehicle, so there would be, it's the net difference between the residual value at the end of the lease, and I think there would have been some really close talking around how that works in this particular case.
Yeah. Right.
Out here in West Auckland, it's the reliability and the durability test. Will they make it over the speed bumps at 100 k's an hour and survive? Can they deal with a ram raid? Little things like that. We breed them special out here in West Auckland. So they've got to trial them out here.
Yeah,
they won't be redlining the tappets, though, will they?
No, they stopped. I think that car actually died. I think they finished that experiment.
I'm not sure that the i4 is going to do that speed hump test in West Auckland. But if you take, for example, as we discussed last time, the Hyundai Kona, that's kind of a weird kind of car / SUV. So that in an urban environment, the four-wheel drive, crap loads of power, that could potentially do the jumping over speed humps and so forth and running around an urban environment and being able to chase dirt bikes across a field, which the old Commodores certainly couldn't do. But anyway, let's move on to a bit more news. And this story is one I think we might see a little bit more of around the place. And that's buyers lodged complaint with VTNZ over flooded vehicle. The buyers of a Toyota Hiace have lodged a complaint with VTNZ over a pre-purchase inspection, which allegedly gave the vehicle the all clear when it turned out to have sustained flood damage. Mandy Hugh was assisting her friend buy the van from a trader in March 2023, and she says she specifically asked VTNZ if it had flood damage at the time of the pre-purchase inspection. The vehicle subsequently stopped running 2 days after it was signed off. The couple were told by an independent mechanic the van had sustained flood damage and needed more than 2,200 in repairs. They took it to the Motor Vehicle Disputes Tribunal, and they got a settlement for the entire purchase price and a contribution to the repairs and road user charges. So we're going to see quite a bit more of this stuff floating around, aren't we, Graham?
Well, yeah, probably. It depends on how many vehicles are made it back out onto the road again that were not. Because this is interesting for several reasons. First of all, it's a late model van that's flood damaged that's in the marketplace. So you'd say, well, okay, why was that vehicle not a write-off that was deregistered and been through the appropriate compliance process? And so therefore, if it was a $30,000, $40,000 van at the time when it was flooded, why was an insurance claim for it? So that'd be very unusual, I think, to find many late model vehicles that weren't insured, weren't covered by insurance in these flood events, and therefore have been through the appropriate channels of the systems. This is a bit of a curious one as to why a late model car like that pops up in New Zealand, assuming it's one of the ones from the Cyclone Gabriel or water events or whatever. But there's some other little red flags in the story I want to touch on for a second. There's actually had an argument with somebody about this very point, which was, first of all, the identification process. So did the buyer, and I don't mean to tarnish the buyer's reputation here, but did they actually ask that of the VTNZ inspection, or is it they thought that they would assume that at the time that they would look at that sort of thing? Because, look, we know in the motor trade that what people think they say and what they think they say when it comes time to have a tribunal appearance and what they actually said can be two or three very different things. And so the second point was the AA's comment, and I guess no love lost between the AA and VTNZ, right? About, well, those are all the signs of it being a flood damage vehicle. Well, a radio not working and there was something else not working, that could be any late model vehicle. Those are not indicators of flood damage. Corrosion under the vehicle, corrosion in the vehicle somewhere. Well, if it was flood damage back in January, February or so, it'd be very unlikely for it to be significant corrosion damage yet for a freshwater flood damage vehicle. We're looking at sort of 2-3 years down the track for significant structural damage to occur if the vehicle hadn't been cleaned properly. I don't know. Like, there's little things in the story that, for me, I'm not taking away from what shouldn't have happened, but I'd like to know a whole lot more before I pass complete and total judgment upon VTNZ for what was or wasn't found.
Yeah.
If the prospective buyer had specifically asked for a check including flood damage, then it doesn't speak well of the VTNZ process. That was the first thing that I thought about. The advice that I've given to people in the past, when asked, how can you tell if a vehicle's been flood damaged, is take a door panel off, because quite often people don't take the inside door panel off and have a look, and you can see where the water line is. That's the first check to verify that this has been in a flood. And then once that's done, then you do need to check the wiring loom in various places for moisture inside the wiring loom. Now, neither of those tests take very long, and they are very instructive in terms of then dealing with the consequences. But you're right, Graham. The consequences of a flooded vehicle often take several years to appear, but it does depend on how long the vehicle's been submerged for, because water has a funny way of getting into places the longer it's submerged. And it's the wiring looms that are most at risk initially, and that's what happened in this case. It is a very curious case. As to how many are on the roads, Richard, I think Graham's right. I would have thought most of them would have been insurance and therefore flagged and therefore on NZTA's written off register. But there will be more than a handful that will not, the person might not have had them insured, and they've taken their chances by trying to sell them elsewhere. And I think that's what's happened in this particular case.
Well, there's another point to that, to add to that before you say your point, Richard, we haven't touched on, is this allegedly is a trader selling the vehicle. So the chain gets even murky because a trader has sold that vehicle. So therefore, one would assume the trader, we haven't named, or it hasn't been named at this stage, has obtained the vehicle from somewhere. How have they obtained it? How have they got a hold of this vehicle? What checks and balances did they put in place prior to selling the vehicle? I said there's a whole lot of information missing to this that I really would like to know more, because it's a really damning indictment upon somebody somewhere. But from VTNZ's perspective, so David, the 2 points you mentioned, if you do a motor vehicle inspection, so a VTNZ pre-purchase inspection, an AA pre-purchase inspection, or all the other the commercial inspection companies, I don't believe, unless they're specifically told and given permission by the vendor of the vehicle, they're allowed to do an invasive inspection involving the removal of door panels or the splitting open of wiring loops. They can't do it. If I was a vendor of a vehicle and I knew the inspector was going to get effectively a pocket knife and cut open a loom or start removing pins on door panels, I'd say, whoa, back up, because you're actually running the risk of doing damage to the product you're inspecting. It's one of the reasons why dealers don't generally like to have inspections done off-site, because they're not sure what actually occurs when a vehicle's in a foreign workshop with people they don't know, with a vehicle out of their care. Any number of different things can happen that are not always necessarily good. And again,
no, I understand, but my advice has been ask to have a door panel taken off, and if the answer is no, get suspicious.
Yep, that's right. So again, where VTNZ actually asked that question specifically at the time.
They probably weren't. And therefore the ability to trace it is a little bit more limited, but there are still signs. But there's an indictment somewhere along the process here. Sorry, Richard, you were going to say.
But by and large, Graham, how reliable do you find pre-purchase inspections?
Well, honestly, and I don't want to sort of damn all the various inspection companies. We get commercial inspections of vehicles all the time by clients. I personally don't think, this is between the trade, I suppose, I don't think most of them are worth a damn. I really don't. I think not all, but a lot of them, I'm going to use the words, failed warrant fitness inspectors out there making a buck checking vehicles. There's a couple of companies, so I'm blessed out here in West Auckland for one company in particular who do a really, really thorough, invasive 2.5 hour inspection on the vehicle. And I won't name them. I'm not here to give commercial kudos to them. But we encourage customers to use this particular operator because he is so thorough. And I would rather...
You can name them if you want, Graham.
Well, okay, I'll name them. So it's Carl from In-Car Automotive. He has a reputation for being remarkably thorny and prickly when it comes to inspections on vehicles. He has a list on his website of dealers he will not inspect vehicles for because he finds them to be, for whatever reason, he does not trust them or trust their practices or the vehicles they offer for sale. That's how thorny he is. Takes 2.5 hours to do an inspection, charges between $250 and $300. But I know that when the customer has the vehicle inspected, they're going to get exactly what they paid for. And some of the other inspection companies that I won't name, I'm fairly certain that their money that customer pays them is not well spent. If you're going to get inspected, I want it done well. That's the sort of business that we operate. And I'm not trying to give Croydon's a buffer up here.
Yeah.
But if someone wants to get a vehicle inspected, I'll make damn sure that it's done really well and they know exactly what it is they're buying and what they're getting, because that's good for me, it's good for us and our business. I don't want crappy inspections, and there's too many of those out there.
Right, on to the next one. Vehicle loan arrears are rising. New Zealand vehicle loans are the only credit type where arrears increased in April 2023, up 5.2% month on month. On a year-on-year basis, vehicle loan arrears were up 24% in April, according to the latest Centrix credit indicator report. Meanwhile, non-mortgage lending is up marginally, so that includes car loans, up 4.1%, largely driven by the increased growth in vehicle financing. Overall consumer arrears saw 411,000 people behind on payments in April 2023, compared to 427,000 in March 2023. Despite this, the current arrears level is 4% higher year on year when compared to April 2022, but still at historically low levels. So, I guess be aware, because if people keep getting into arrears, it's going to get even harder and harder and harder to get finance for those trickier customers. Are you finding any issues at the moment?
That's actually, I think there's a positive in that story. We've talked about the fact that bank lending on motor vehicles, so taking onto the mortgage, is almost not existent now. So There's been a real drive back into dealership finance. And so these numbers you've quoted are specifically around vehicle loans that we don't always see with bank lending when things are put into mortgages instead. They fall outside those statistics. So with the rise of dealership funding and financing occurring over the last year in particular, compared to the number of arrears you've just reported on as a percentage, I would say it's actually lower, or it's certainly level picking. I don't see a negative in there at all, considering how many business loans have been written for vehicle funding by dealers in the last year.
Because it's up because lending is up, is what you're saying.
Well, lending's up in that sector. Overall lending may not be up, but it's transferred from bank lending, where we don't see it, to vehicle finance lending, where we do see it. We do see the numbers.
Yep.
It'll be interesting to track this, though, because my gut feeling is that we are going to see this get worse rather than better, given the economic conditions and environment. I just think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg at the moment. But you're right, Graham, because it's transferred from banking to finance companies, the visibility of it will now enable us to monitor that more closely and get a closer feel for how it's tracking. So watch this space. The number of building companies and other companies starting to tip over, the number of mortgagee sales are starting to increase. The indicators are just showing that it's tougher now than it has been for some time.
Yeah.
Right, a couple of little light stories left to go today. Change of distributor for MV Augusta from September 2023. The KTM Group Australia and New Zealand, subsidiary of Pieri Mobility, that's a flash name for a motorbike company, and it will assume the distribution of MV Augusta motorcycles in both countries. As part of the global partnership, the KTM Group will provide the MV Augusta dealership network with sales, support, logistics, marketing and customer service. An agreement with the current distributor Urban Motor Imports, who has overseen the growth of the MV Augusta brand for nearly a decade in the Australian-New Zealand market, will see the existing dealership network assist with a smooth transition for MV Augusta riders through to September. A newly created dealer network will be able to draw on the strength of the company and benefit from the differentiated business strategy that the KTM Group Australia and New Zealand will bring. Are you a fan of MV Augusta bikes, David?
I like the look of them. I don't like the ride, but they're just not my style of bike. But the name Pierre Mobility is just Pierre is just the name of the guy who owns it. So it is. He has really taken KTM in leaps and bounds. So this is the fourth brand for the Pierre Group now. So KTM, Husqvarna, Gas, and now MV Augusta. So he's starting to build a collection of brands, and the way manufacturing and distribution of motor vehicles is going these days is that you've got to have volume and you've got to have range of product. And what better way to do that than to have a number of marques? So he's basically building the equivalent motorbike empire to the Stellantis group or to the Volkswagen group, etc. It's an interesting move. These bikes have got a reputation, sports bikes, road touring bikes. It's a niche market, but it also covers a section of the manufacturing that the Pierre Group don't have. So they have with the KTM, they've got adventure bikes and off-road bikes and some on-road touring bikes. Husqvarna is very much small road bikes, but it was also off-road. Gas is off-road. He's starting to bring some on-road capability with Gas. But this is the first pure on-road sports and sports touring brand that the Pierre Group has had.
Fantastic. Now, the new Hyundai Kona will make its first appearance at Field Days. The new Hyundai Kona makes its first New Zealand appearance at National Field Days at Mystery Creek, Hamilton from June 14 to 17. They're bringing along hybrid and fully electric versions alongside normal petrol ones. Yes, that'll be on the Hyundai stand. And if we, I guess, just talk a bit more broadly about Field Days, I know a number of brands are appearing there. I think we previously discussed that Twitter has returned, I guess, and they're going to run their Hilux focused stand on hydrogen. Hyundai are there, BYD are there, and I believe they're showing off both the Dolphin and maybe the Seal. Interestingly, LDV and SsangYong, which in previous years have had one of the biggest sites, are not there. And I guess that's because of the timing of the ownership change. I was chatting to someone at Ford, and they've been given some extra space to expand into that space left by LDV. It's it'll be interesting to see Field Days this year. Not as much automotive buzz around it as previous years, I don't think. I think almost maybe it was a little too jammed together with the last year's one.
Yeah, I'm going to be there Friday next week, so I don't know that I'll be able to do it from my cell phone, I guess, live from the field shows. But I'm going to be there Friday, so I'm going to have a good look around. I'm also going to use it as an opportunity to catch up with the motorcycle guys and just have a chat with them and say my goodbyes.
Fantastic. Cool.
You're away for Field Days, aren't you, Richard? Are you away?
I am. This is my the first year in many years that I'm not going to Field Days.
Who am I going to go watch tractor drags with now?
Your son?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah. Buggy your cars. I'm going to buy myself a new pair of red. Actually, no, I'll bring my dirty pair of red bands. I do need a new stock stick, and I do like me a good tractor drag.
Look, the biggest disappointment this year, and half the reason I'm not going, is that LDV every year had the most fantastic lunch. It was LDV SsangYong. They put on the best lunch of any stand. Hyundai are the naming rights sponsor of that place, but the LDV SsangYong stand usually won on the lunch, and that was because just most years they did a curry buffet, and it was usually exceptional. So
media whores.
On
a good lunch, you'll say anything.
I'm always too busy walking around to have lunch, Richard.
Yeah, well, I get in early being a media, so I get there at about 5:30 in the morning. So by the time lunchtime comes around, if I don't eat, I'm going to die. Of course, famously a few years back, I was the one that was pressing Jacinda Ardern about electric utes at Field Days that all the other TV stations picked up on. So that was was a fun bit of that.
That was your early moment.
Yes. Now, last little story is just a little wee notification, because we've discussed this kind of stuff before, but there's a Euro 5 and Euro 6 VIA webinar for those of you in the import trade. It's being held next Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. It's designed to inform people on the proposal and provide feedback to assist its submission to the government. That's the big thing, so I would suggest everyone in the import trade get along to that. Details on our website or on the VIA website. Now, next week we will hopefully do a live stream at the usual time on Friday. I'm probably going to actually do an extra one, maybe not with these characters, Wednesday morning or Thursday morning. I'll let people know online from AADA. Again, as I said at the top of the show, if you are going to the show, just flick us a line and we'll send you the details to come along, and we'll buy you a nice chilled frothy beverage at a bar overlooking Sydney. But yeah, no, that should be fun. And everyone else got busy weeks ahead, I imagine.
Yeah, I probably won't be able to participate Friday next week. I'll either be driving or will be at the field days, and so I'll see you in a fortnight.
Yes. Invite him back, Richard.
Might not invite me back. This might be
exactly. We've got a really busy week, and for those of you in the import trade right now, you all know what I'm talking about, because all the boats came in at once this week and over the next couple of days. So the wharves are absolutely just overflowing with vehicles. Compliance shops are full. Everyone has everything everywhere, and so everyone's scrambling frantically to get stock on the ground after a bit of a hiatus in shipping. So it is actually going to be a really, really busy week. And we then need to get the buyers into the showrooms, onto the forecourts, and to get these things out the other end of the door too. So yeah, really busy week. That's what it's all about.
And the mayor hasn't shut down the carport yet. Was it 6 months? Wasn't that some months ago?
Anyway, I'll catch everyone next week.
All right.